Okay. All right. Again, thank you all for being here. This obviously is an important topic for our industry, and we have been looking for a while for someone who can speak factually on the issue. And so I'm excited to introduce our speaker today, Augustine Tantillo. He currently serves as a consultant to the National Council of Textile Organizations, NCTO. From August 2013 through April 2019, Mr. Tantillo held the position of president and CEO of NCTO, which serves as the voice of the domestic textile industry in Washington, D.C. With over 150 current members, NCTO represents manufacturers from every major sector of the industry, including fiber, yarn, fabric, home furnishings, and apparel products. From 2002 through early 2013, Mr. Tantillo served as the executive director of the American Manufacturing Trade Action Coalition. AMTAC represented U.S. producers dedicated to improving international trade policies to bolster U.S. manufacturing investment and employment. Mr. Tantillo was appointed by President George H.W. Bush in May of 1989 to serve as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Textiles, Apparel, and Consumer Goods. In that position, Mr. Tantillo developed and implemented policies to enhance their international competitiveness of the U.S. textile and apparel sector, as well as major consumer goods industries. In addition, Mr. Tantillo served as chairman of the Committee for the Implementation of Textile Agreements, which is composed of 5 federal agencies. Under Mr. Tantillo's direction, this committee established policy in relation to the United States government's textile apparel import restraint program, governing over $100 billion in trade annually. Mr. Tantillo also saw the domestic manufacturers, also oversaw the government's export promotion program for the textile apparel industries, which is designed to assist domestic manufacturers in expanding their sales into key overseas markets. The administering of 2 separate textile research grants totaling over $11 million annually was another of Mr. Tantillo's responsibilities at the Department of Commerce. These grants were designed to enhance modernization of the textile and apparel industries through technological advancement. For 16 months prior to his appointment at the Department of Commerce, Mr. Tantillo served as Chief of Staff to the United States Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina. And now today he is here with us. Thank you very much for being here.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. And thank you, Carrie, for that kind introduction. Only half of it was true, but
Move this out of the way. There we go.
okay. Well, good morning. I want to thank ITA for this invitation. Carrie did mention a lot of things. One of the things she failed to mention was my extensive scientific and chemistry background. And the reason she failed to do that is because I don't have one. I have a policy background, and I hope to make up for my lack of scientific know-how in regard to this matter by keeping this discussion mainly focused on policy. As she mentioned, I'm here representing the National Council of Textile Organizations. NCTO does represent the entire production chain in Washington, D.C. That means that we advocate for the interest of the industry before Congress, before the executive branch of our government. Have about 160 members right now, and we generally focus on 2 or 3 major policy areas. International trade is a huge one, government contracting and procurement, and in the area we'll be focused on today, sustainability, regulatory, tax-related issues. PFAS. This is a issue that's garnered a tremendous amount of attention, both within our industry and the national media. And while I said that I don't have a scientific background of any significant merit, I do want to start with a little bit of basic chemistry just to make sure we're all on the same page. PFAS are a family of organic chemicals that all have one thing in common, and that's a fluorine carbon bond. When I say family, it's a large one because there are now estimates of up to 9,000.
So we can see this.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, up to 9,000 different PFAS. And as you would assume, there's a tremendous amount of diversity within that family. I want you to think about it in a little bit of the same fashion as you would automobiles. Thousands of automobiles, types of automobiles. There's a Ford Pinto on one end of the spectrum and a Ferrari on the other. So while they're both automobiles, they are wildly diverse in their structure and their nature and their performance and so forth and so on. These fluorine carbon bonds are incredibly strong, which means they do not break down easily. And hence, the terminology that is now being used in association with PFAS being described as forever chemicals, because they do last for a very long time. In that creates both the benefit, oops, and I lost Carrie, and for some reason it's not advancing. You get the benefit and the problem. Yep, thank you. They last a long time. They're very strong. They're very durable. That can be a good thing from a chemical treatment standpoint in regard to products. It's a bad thing from an environmental standpoint. But let's talk about the value of PFAS before we talk about the problem, because we'll spend a great deal of time on the problem, but it should be balanced out so that we have a proper perspective about these chemicals. PFAS impart important and extremely valuable performance enhancing characteristics. Because of the strength of these bonds, they impart strength to the products that they treat or used to treat: stain resistance, cleanability, durability, leading into improved performance and enhanced customer satisfaction. And this is important from an environmental standpoint: longer life cycles. I want you to think about the chairs that you're sitting on. If every time someone spilled coffee on that chair, you had to throw it out, that's an environmental issue. Now you're putting more stuff in the landfill. Now you're creating a larger carbon footprint in terms of having to produce more of this product to replace what is not durable, what is not cleanable, so forth and so on. PFAS are used in virtually every manufacturing sector in the industrial world: aerospace, automotives, telecommunications. They are used in textiles, and we'll talk about that at length. A couple of areas that people may not realize: PFAS are used on medical devices that are implanted in the human body and have been for decades. PFAS are sometimes used in cosmetics and, of course, are applied topically. So there is a tremendous amount of confusion about what the true impact of these chemicals are in regard to human health. In textiles, PFAS provide heat resistance, oil and water repellency, enhanced cleanability, durability, and moisture substance barriers. And when you look at those performance characteristics, you then begin to understand where they are valuable in terms of our product mix, our industry. PFAS are used in fabrics with numerous end-use applications. Of course, the upholstery industry, we just talked about the value there of enhanced cleanability. Carpeting, a huge aspect of of carpeting and the ability to keep carpets clean, and some apparel, high performance apparel. But you really start to see the value of these chemical treatments as you get into much more sophisticated applications, such as the U.S. military, first responders, energy exploration gear, and personal protective equipment. I want you to think about a firefighter going into a burning building. He or she wants to know that gear that they're wearing is not going to melt, is not going to fail. Military personnel being exposed to all kinds of contaminants. Military personnel who are wearing chem bio suits. And probably the most vibrant example for us over the last couple of years are frontline medical workers who need isolation gowns and personal protective equipment to keep barriers protecting them from viruses and biological contaminants. The textile sector obviously uses PFAS and has for decades. But they are not using the types of PFAS that have been tied to environmental problems or to human health issues. This is an important aspect of this debate. 9,000 different PFAS. Some of them have been identified as linkages to very serious problems. The ones that have been identified, U.S. textile industry is not using. And so you get into the question of, do you ban all PFAS? Or just the ones that are creating the problem? So that's a segue into the other side of this spectrum. We talked about the value. There is a very real problem associated with these chemicals. Since PFAS do not break down easily, we talked about that incredibly strong fluorine-carbon bond. They are persistent in the environment long after their intended use. And so they're showing up in water tables, they're showing up in soil samples. Some, and I emphasize that obviously, some PFAS have been linked to serious environmental and human health issues, such as cancer and weakened immune systems. PFAS contamination have most commonly been linked to chemical companies and spills, or the misuse of handling, how they have produced these chemicals. A very famous chemical spill in North Carolina in the Cape Fear Basin down in the Wilmington area. And the other major linkage is being tied back to fire suppression foams. If you've ever seen on television, the foams that they use to put out an aircraft fire, they contain PFAS. Those PFAS get in the, are sprayed on the soil, and they leach into the water table. And this has become an issue around military bases where they do routine training using these foams. So those two areas are responsible for the vast majority of the PFAS environmental issues that we are aware of. So transferring a little bit here from the science and the basic background, the policy issues that are evolving as a result of the use of these chemicals. Environmental groups, local communities, the national media have all increased their focus on PFAS in recent years, and they are amping up the pressure to eliminate or prohibit the use of these chemicals by American industry. That pressure is being applied at the federal level, and that generally translates to the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. And under the Biden administration, the White House Scientific Council or Science Council has made PFAS one of its priorities. So the executive branch is involved in this discussion. Of course, Congress is involved in this discussion, but not only the federal level. This has become quite the prevalent issue among many states. And I don't really care what anyone's political leanings are this morning, and it's not a comment one way or the other, but in some of the more progressive leaning states, you will see an extremely aggressive approach to issues like this. So California, New York, Maine, New Hampshire, Minnesota, Washington State, Oregon, just to name a handful, who have really begun to pay a tremendous amount of attention to this issue. So on the federal level, the EPA, the Trump administration got a lot of criticism for a more conservative view on environmental issues. EPA was a center point for some of that criticism, and the lack of aggressive tendencies on PFAS is one of the issues that the previous administration did catch some heat for. As a result, the Biden administration is much more aggressive, and the Biden's EPA has published something called their PFAS strategic roadmap. And this lays out a comprehensive agenda for the next 2 years, even longer than that. I'd say 2 to 6 years, assuming the president gets reelected, on what the EPA is doing and intends to do to further regulate these chemicals. And it includes things such as the denial of approval for new PFAS. I mentioned they're up to 9,000. A couple of years ago, there were 5,000. These chemicals have so many uses and are viewed as so valuable around the world. People are researching how to create variations to make them stronger, to make them even more useful. But this administration is saying, stop right there. Don't make any more of these. Enhanced reporting under the toxic release inventory system, designation of certain PFAS under something called CERCLA. It's better known as the Superfund Act, which involves liability cleanup and litigation in terms of previous mishaps associated with PFAS, nationwide monitoring and establishment of PFAS drinking water levels, and reduced discharge allowances. So this is a game plan that this administration says we're putting into place because we want to get much, much more aggressive than our predecessors have been on this issue. And as someone or a company that might be using PFAS, note from this, your reporting requirements and your restrictions and the amount of discharges and so forth and so on are all going to become tighter, tougher, more difficult. And those discharges and allowances are going to begin to shrink to minuscule levels. Congress is the other outlet for this pressure on the national level, and there are several competing initiatives. It's almost like a popularity event for some members. My PFAS bill is more aggressive than yours. And so routinely you'll see bills dropped in. I'm going to give you an example of one by Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan. And Michigan's been a little bit of an epicenter for PFAS and drinking water issues. And so the Michigan delegation is highly aggressive on this. And she's put out a bill that essentially says there are some PFAS that we know are bad. Let's designate them as toxic substances immediately. And then let's give the EPA a timeline to do the other 9,000. So potentially listing all 9,000 PFAS as toxic substances within 5 years. Now, that sounds good if you're an environmental activist, because you're taking the approach that, hey, there was a problem here. That means there's a big problem. That means the problem needs to go away. From a scientific approach, for the better part of these chemicals, or this family of chemicals, there's no linkage to a problem. There has been no demonstration of a hazardous health condition associated with the vast majority. And again, it's the sum versus all approach. Environmental groups are saying, get rid of them all. Others are saying, get rid of the ones that are a problem. And the analogy I would use, and whether it's fair or not, I'll leave up to your judgment, is on the interstate this afternoon, there's probably going to be an accident. And someone might get hurt severely in that accident. We could come in as policymakers tomorrow and say, get rid of all cars. Cars are bad. On the other side of that policy debate, we have to say, well, but our economy, our society functions around the ability to travel from one place to the other. If we do that, even though there's no direct linkage to all cars causing these types of problems, there will be ramifications. And we'll get into that in a little more detail a little bit later, but it hopefully helps frame for you kind of what's been taking place. This bill, the PFAS Action Act, introduced by Congresswoman Dingell, passed the House in July of 2021, but it has stalled in the Senate. And I would venture to say that it will not pass between now and the end of this year. And Congress will have to begin this process all over again in 2023 if they want to pass a comprehensive bill. The second sort of outlet for this pressure on Congress in relation to PFAS is to impact government procurement. The government buys a bunch of stuff. From our industry, they buy $2 billion worth of textile-related product every year. There is a move within Congress to keep the Pentagon from procuring anything that has been treated with PFAS. And you get the same mindset. PFAS are bad. Why are we as a government subsidizing the use of PFAS by buying equipment, materials, product that has been treated with them? And so within something called the National Defense Authorization Act, it's passed every year. It governs the entirety of U.S. military policy. There is a provision that has now popped up for 2 years in a row. It essentially says Pentagon cannot buy anything treated with PFAS. That includes textiles, apparel, footwear, among various other industrial groupings. This ban was adopted again in the House of Representatives. as part of their National Defense Authorization Act. The Senate, of course, has to approve it. And last year, the Senate decided to strike it out of the final bill. But we're in the same exact situation again here as this process winds down. Congress, in my estimation, will pass a National Defense Authorization Act between now and Christmas. Right now, the House version of the bill has this prohibition. The Senate does not, but the two chambers need to reconcile their differences and produce a single bill that they send on to the president for signature. And so we'll have to see whether or not Congress decides that key government agencies should stop buying product treated with PFAS. That would mean upholstered furniture purchased by the U.S. Army, purchased by the U.S. Navy, so forth and so on, among other items. So I mentioned tremendous pressure on the federal government, but also now tremendous pressure being applied to many states. Many state legislatures are now grappling with this issue. Numerous states are moving to regulate the use of PFAS and sale of consumer items treated with PFAS. So states are essentially beginning to say, you can't sell this in California any longer. You can't sell a product, you can't sell this chair if it's treated with PFAS in Maine. And oftentimes what you'll find is that the environmental activists have even more success at the state level because, again, they're dealing with states where they are viewed as a key constituency. And as a result, some of these states are extremely aggressive in the approach that they are taking, and they are moving much, much more rapidly than the federal regulatory agencies are, or Congress is doing. And there's a phenomenon associated with these states that you could describe as a copycat approach. So California passes something, Minnesota says, we got to pass the same thing. Or in a worse sort of sense, Minnesota says, well, if they did that, we got to be even more aggressive because we don't want to be seen as not as sincere and aggressive on this issue as someone else. So a lot of copycat activity taking place at the state level. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 examples. I mentioned California. Just a few weeks ago, Governor Newsom signed Assembly Bill 1817 into law. This bill will, in a little over 2 years, completely ban the manufacture, distribution, or sale in the state of California of any new textile articles that contain PFAS. So January 1st, 2025, you can't sell anything in California that has undergone a PFAS treatment. In our view, the huge problem here is that this bill does not make a segregation between PFAS that have been linked to environmental issues and all the rest of PFAS within the broader chemical family. So you can be using something that has not been demonstrated to be a problem, but it still has to go. And you're going to have to provide your customers with a certificate that essentially says no PFAS has been used on this item. So I want you to think about what the chain reaction is here. Your customer is told, I can't sell this in California anymore. The state of California tells him or her that. Customer's going to pick up the phone and call who? Going to call you as a fabric supplier and say, no PFAS, send me a certificate. And you're going to tell the customer, okay, but that upholstered fabric is not going to be stain resistant to the degree that you have become accustomed to and you've marketed your product for. It's not going to be water repellent to that degree. It may not be flame resistant to the same degree. And then your customer is going to say, we got a problem. State of California is going to say, yeah, that's your problem. Figure it out. Again, because what they chose to do was not to say, this type of PFAS is bad, don't use it. This type of PFAS, okay, we're still researching it, but right now you can still use it and you can still get the performance characteristics that you built your business around. But you can see the window here, 2 years. My advice to you, begin working on this issue today to figure out how you're going to answer those questions for your customers, because that's a huge market, right? California is a huge market. And at some point, how many more states beyond California have to pass a bill like this before you say, I'm done. I can't segregate my business to such a degree to where this is going to a PFAS usage state and this is going to a PFAS prohibition state. See, it becomes very confusing and very difficult very quickly. State of Washington, working on the Healthy People Prevention Pollution for Healthy People and Puget Sound Act. This bill would ban the use of PFAS in indoor furniture and furnishings after the 1st of January 2026. This is an upholstered fabric, or it's a furniture specific bill, as opposed to California, which was just about everything. If you're making outdoor furniture and furnishings, you have to begin notifying the state of Washington that you are using PFAS on that product. So you don't have to get rid of it by January 1st, 2026, but you begin to be subject to these notification requirements. There are the state of Washington is using a very broad definition for furnishings. It includes table linens, bedding, cushions, curtains, drapes, awnings, towels. But again, you begin to see how the states are moving much more rapidly and aggressively than even the federal government. The state of Maine intends to implement on January 1st of next year its Stop PFAS Pollution Act. This bill is much more narrow in terms of the products that it covers on the front end, carpets and rugs. It also won't allow you to use post-consumer purchase treatments, Scotchgard. They're outlawing the ability for you to come in and use some sort of stain repellent treatment after you purchase the product. But it is instituting a notification requirement on everything else, basically. So some products can't sell them after January that have been treated with PFAS. Everything else going to have to begin notifying the state of Maine that this product was treated with PFAS. What are they going to do with that information? but they are collecting it. And eventually, they're going to ban everything by January 1st, 2030. Now, just as a side note, a key question about all of this is how are these states going to enforce this? In discussions with the state of Maine, because we're trying to collect information for our members and say, well, this is what they intend to do. I asked the question about imported product. So are you going to test imported product to make sure that it's PFAS free? Because our members are going to comply with your rule. That's just the nature of who they are and their commitment to sustainability and so forth and so on. Oh, well, the federal government probably is going to do. No, federal government's not banning PFAS. You are. Well, they didn't provide any resources for that. So I guess we're going to have to ask them, the legislature, if they are going to then commit resources that will allow us to do the testing. So it's an honor system, at least up front. This is, I convey that to you just to drive home the point that the policy is outpacing the science. The policy is outpacing the logic. When you go to ban something, you need the resources to ensure that people who do not comply will be held to the same standard as people who do. Because if not, the people who aren't complying are getting an unfair advantage in the marketplace, right? Because their product still works. Look, gosh, the stain repellency here is great. Your product, for some reason, it's not as good as it used to be. I don't know why. Huge problem in terms of the aggressiveness of these states and the failure to connect the dots between enforcement, science, and logic, and their well-intentioned agendas. Those were just three examples. I mentioned earlier that numerous other states are at some stage in this process of putting together legislative and regulatory initiatives to restrict the use of PFAS on various products, and I list some of those for you. So what is the industry essentially doing in response to this? NCTO has put together a subset of its membership to form what we call the Fluoral Technology Working Group. So we have about 24 members who are heavily engaged in this working group, trying to help policymakers understand the science from the perspective of the industry and trying to ensure that we as an industry are not the sacrificial lamb here. As policymakers go to implement these prohibitions, we don't want to be the one industry where, oh, strict prohibition, but this industry over here for some reason gets exempted. So we are working within the policy arena to present what we would describe as a science-based solution to the problem. And it, again, revolves around this issue of some versus all. Get rid of the ones where there is a linkage. No debate, no argument. Ban them. We don't need to use them. Nobody else needs to use them. Where there is no linkage, why is there this hyper aggressiveness? Would we take that approach on every chemical? Number one. Number two, do we understand the ramifications of banning all of these chemicals almost instantaneously? As I mentioned, we do not oppose the prohibitions on hazardous PFAS. But we're trying to help policymakers understand, okay, if you get rid of all PFAS, you are going to undercut the performance capabilities of textiles as we currently have grown accustomed or currently understand. And you can say, upholstered furniture, who cares? It's just furniture. But what about the uniform and the chem bio suit that the military warfighter has to rely on? What about, as I said, the firefighter going into a burning building? What about the first responder who's wading through a sewage infested flooded street to get to someone's house to rescue them? They want to know that equipment works. And what about the healthcare worker who goes into the hospital every day and is exposed to viruses that are deadly? Because we don't have a solution for some of these performance characteristics without PFAS. Now, and I'm going to back up for a second and say that issue is being hotly debated, and there's some within our industry who would say, oh yeah, get rid of them because we can get there. And it depends on who you talk to. One company will say, I don't need to use PFAS anymore. And others would say, you are not going to get anywhere close to this characteristic without it. I think we probably could all agree that a healthy transition period from PFAS dependent to PFAS free is probably warranted, especially again for these chemicals where there is no linkage. The other point we make is that we're not being stubborn. We as an industry are not sitting here saying there's no problem, there's nothing to see here. We're using more PFAS now than we did 5 years ago, and we just went, no, we're doing the exact opposite. We're reducing our footprint wherever possible and trying to get to a PFAS-free environment as soon as we possibly can. And then the other issue is one I've already talked about. Federal and state governments, they talk a good game about get rid of it, but then when it comes to actually enforcing this and making sure there's a level commercial playing field, they generally fall short. What I would say to you is we have been somewhat successful on the federal level in trying to get a science-based discussion moving forward. And the federal government has been somewhat logical in its approach in terms of wanting to do this where there is scientific background and scientific justification for the decisions that they make. As a result, the EPA and the White House have generally focused their attention on the specific PFAS where there is that direct linkage. PFOA and PFOS, these are two types of PFAS, and they probably would be defined as the two worst actors in the entire family. And there's been a tremendous amount, and rightfully so, of prohibitions and regulatory activity and restrictions associated with these two specific PFAS. Again, we aren't using them in the textile industry. So we totally agree. We figured this out a long time ago. We didn't need the federal government to tell us these guys were a problem. And so for the most part, the federal government is doing a some as opposed to all approach. And as a result, bills seeking comprehensive bans of PFAS have stalled in Congress. Initiatives seeking procurement restrictions on PFAS have stalled in Congress. But again, I underline some, or so far, because the pressure is building. The aggressiveness of those who want to restrict these chemicals is building. And the next time you get a presentation, not so far in the future, it may be different. We've had much, much less success on the state level. On the state level, as I mentioned, the policy is outpacing the science. And the policy is being driven by emotion and by social media and by constituencies that are much better placed within some of these states than we in the textile industry. Okay, there's some apparel workers in California. They're not well organized. They don't engage heavily in the political process. And the point is that the State House in California doesn't really care what the U.S. textile industry thinks about this issue. We have worked with others in the business sector, the U.S. Chamber, the National Association of Manufacturers, the American Chemistry Council, at both the federal and state level. But again, some of these states, very progressive leaning, very much attuned to the concerns of environmental groups, and you're starting to see them taking this very strong and aggressive approach on these issues. Unfortunately, many of the states are taking the all as opposed to the some approach. And as I noted earlier, there's a copycat phenomenon that's out there. So in conclusion, this issue is not going away. It's getting more intense. And if you were to Google this morning, PFAS problems, you'd find 5, 6 articles out there almost every day on why PFAS are a problem, and governments are moving too slow, and industries being intransigent, so forth and so on. So the public relations aspect of this is exploding. Environmental groups and news media are pressing even harder now for bans and prohibitions. And we're going to continue until our membership says not to. And I'm going to acknowledge there is a discussion and a debate within our industry. But right now, the view is, let's get a science-based remedy to this as opposed to an emotionally based, a social media-based response that treats these chemicals like all others, A, and B, at least gives us a transition to a point to where we can move away from them and still produce products that our customers want to buy. My advice to you is to get educated. This issue is going to become even more difficult, and you're going to have pressure from your customers to know what, when, how much, so forth and so on, PFAS are being used. And you're going to get pressure from your customers to get out. And you're going to need a scientific-based response to that. And I encourage you to join the effort. If this is important to you, in some way, you need to find a vehicle to express that a science-based solution is the right approach to this. And it is the way to help protect your business interests, your employees, and the fact that we as a government don't have all the answers. And by rushing too far, too fast, we'll give advantages to people producing competing products offshore while taking away jobs and opportunities for us here domestically. And I'll stop there and try to answer any questions that you may have today. Yes.
9,000 tests. Have any been tested and proven to be acceptable? Or is it just that they haven't tested any yet? The ones they've tested, they've decided are a problem.
Yeah. So there is a subset that have been tested, shown to have proven to have a linkage to a problem. The others, the testing, I don't want to say there's been no testing, but
Has anything been tested and accepted as non-toxic or non-problem?
well, in the sense that none have been shown, they've been tested and none have been shown to have a linkage to a problem, but the environmental groups say, well, we don't know over time. So the testing process is a function of your perspective, so to speak. Again, there are companies and researchers who will tell you, we took this medical device, we applied PFAS to strengthen it and make it function properly. And we put it in someone's body 30 years ago. There's been no adverse impact associated with that. That's probably the single greatest test you can have. Yet, environmental groups say, we don't know. It'll be decades before we know whether or not there is some ramification. And they, again, are taking the some are a problem, therefore all are a problem approach. This is a legitimate question about the range, the depth, and the level of testing that has taken place and the certainty associated with pick any one of the PFAS out of that 9,000. But that is applicable to virtually every chemical that is used. Is there a known problem with a certain chemical? Well, we didn't test for that problem because that proactive ability to prove or disprove everything will lead you to an almost limitless set of tests and circumstances that almost hard to imagine. It's the quandary. What should be tested? What's acceptable versus there's a linkage. We know it now. It has to go.
Does the institute have the list of the 9,000? These 500 we know are bad. We know they're bad. Is there a specific outline list somewhere?
The EPA has generally listed certain substances that they think are a problem. Again, this is so expansive. The list a year ago would be obsolete. And it's one of the reasons I think the Biden administration is saying, hey, stop making these things. It's just they're proliferating at such a rate that it's almost impossible to regulate. So there are various PFAS chemicals that have been routinely identified as problematic. Everything else, as the previous question indicates, is an unknown. And we're at various states of trying to figure out, well, is this a problem? And of course, the environmental groups, they don't want to take the risk at all. That in essence is their argument. We should not have to wait till someone gets sick to ban a PFAS. And that's what you're trying to find, some sort of rational approach to dealing with. Any other questions? Yes.
For the certifications, those are not going to be required until 2045, if I understand that correctly, and then do we know where you can get these certifications from yet, or is that also kind of ambiguous?
Yeah, and in regard to one of the state bills,
Yeah, the California.
so the California bill is all PFAS. So if you use PFAS, your customer is going to ask you to send a certificate that says no PFAS treatment on this fabric. So that's why I encourage you to get educated on this. There's going to have to be a sustainability person within your company that's working with management to know, are we using these? Because if we're using these, then you're going to have to send something to your customer saying, we can't sell you this fabric. Because if you're going to distribute it in California. So it gets very complicated very quickly as you're parsing out states and their requirements, what customers will need. Eventually, your customer is going to come to you and say, no more PFAS. I don't care. Whether I sell in California or whether I sell in South Carolina, I don't care. Because I can't keep it straight any longer. And I just want to tell the state that I'm done. I'm not using this. That's, of course, the good side of that is building the pressure on finding substitutes and speeding up that research and eventually getting to a point to where you can say, I can get you there. Maybe 99% of what we were doing without a PFAS treatment. They're going to give me that. That's going to be the way this evolves, one way or the other. Any other questions? Well, if not, I want to thank you. It's a difficult subject. It's not easy or black and white. I wish I could say to you, these folks are wrong and I'm right, but there's a lot of debate, serious and sincere debate on both sides of this. So thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you very much.